This is the third presentation of the series, Learning Objectives and Outcomes. The presentation is titled Comprehension. Regardless of whether assessment is formative or summative, comprehension assessments should provide accurate reflection of comprehension skills alone, without being skewed by students' abilities in other areas, such as reading, vocabulary, grammar, and writing. This presentation provides recommendations intended to assist in conducting accurate comprehension assessments for the listed learning outcomes. Since listening skills develop before reading skills, it would thus be prudent to rely on listening comprehension as a more accurate reflection of comprehension rather than reading comprehension. This suggestion implies that if reading is still developing, it will act as a hindrance or an obstacle. So either read the story aloud to the student or assist the student in reading the story. The student's ability to express ideas, whether orally or in writing, is also still developing, with writing skills being far more challenging to develop. It is therefore more accurate to assess comprehension through oral answers. In these early phases of the program, when both oral and written expression are both still developing, accept the simplest form of an answer that demonstrates student comprehension. Whether that answer is by pointing with a finger to a picture, or by drawing a picture, or just answering using a single word. In order to accurately assess comprehension, it is imperative that students understand the question, particularly during the initial part of the program when students are still getting used to being questioned. So rephrasing questions, simplifying vocabulary, providing analogies and examples are all techniques that should be used to allow students to understand the question. While assessments can be based on the current lesson's story, using recently learned material assesses memorization more so than it does comprehension. Try using unfamiliar material, such as a story of an upcoming lesson. Students are required, in such a case, to listen to the story rather than read it, and to orally answer a selected number of its comprehension questions. Comprehension has depth. The SMILES program identifies 4 levels of comprehension: literal, inferential, applied, and creative. Accordingly, there are 4 sets of learning objectives and outcomes. Literal comprehension is the ability to understand the story at its literal level. In other words, understanding that which is explicitly presented in the narrative, such as the names of the characters, the setting of the story, and other details and events. These are questions about the who, the what, the when, and the where, as long as the answer is explicitly stated in the narrative of the story. Then answering the question reflects literal comprehension. As students learn to identify the events of a story, they soon after develop the ability to sequence these events. Retelling the story is a skill that develops from the ability to sequence events. Inferential comprehension refers to understanding that is arrived to through inference and reasoning. These are questions whose answers are not explicitly stated in the narrative of the story. They require deeper analysis. C9 and 10 require students to think through the events and identify the problem and its solution. 11 through 13 require students to think beyond the events and the state of the characters to infer reasons for these events, for the characters' actions, and to develop insight into character emotions. Most of these questions tend to deal with the how and why. How was the problem solved? Why did the character act or feel this way? How do you think the character felt when that happened? Applied comprehension is the ability to apply personal opinion and experience in such a way so as to demonstrate understanding of the story. This level of comprehension is assessed through questions such as, do you think the character did the right thing? C14. Evaluating character's choice of action. Did you like the story? And why? C15. Providing opinion. And finally, has something like this ever happened to you? Relating the story to real-life experiences. Creative comprehension is the ability to compose. It requires comprehension, imagination, and creativity. It starts off with composing extensions or modifications to a story. Students must understand the story to be able to creatively modify its ending or compose an ending that is missing. Several stories in the series are left without an ending, specifically to allow for student creativity to express itself. Here is what to look for in story extensions or modifications. 1. Does the composition logically relate to the story? 2. Does the composition demonstrate understanding of the story? And 3. Does the composition demonstrate originality of ideas? Throughout the program, students are challenged with composing their own stories. Initially, these activities are titled Draw Your Story and require students to compose a short story and support it through illustration or photographs. Later, when writing skills have been developed, the activities become titled Write Your Story, and students, in this case, are required to write a story. In all cases, here's what to look for in these original compositions. 1. Does the composition follow a logical sequence of events? 2. Can the student answer questions about the composition that demonstrate understanding? 3. Does the composition demonstrate originality of ideas? This concludes the third presentation. The following presentation explores learning objectives and outcomes for grammar.